Let's get straight to MS Now. White House reporter Akayla Gardner, Bloomberg White House correspondent Jeff Mason, Richard Haass of the Council on Foreign Relations, and retired Army intelligence officer Lieutenant General Karen Gibson. She served as Deputy Director of National Intelligence at the DNI and was Intel Director for CENTCOM. It's great to have all of you with us. Akayla, CENTCOM says another ship turned around at the Navy's command just this morning, bringing the total now to 14. But still, commercial ships aren't risking this voyage. Is the blockade proving as successful as the administration wants?
Well, the reason that the U.S. really started this blockade was to show Iran that they're not the only ones that can control the Strait of Hormuz. And essentially what we've seen is them mostly being able to block Iran's ships from getting through, according to trackers who follow the ship's movement. But at the end of the day, the reason the president has been so focused on the Strait of Hormuz is because of the economic pain that it's causing here at home. We still see gas prices above $4, and that is not going to change until we see the U.S. and Iran reach a ceasefire agreement. And we're hearing that there's potentially going to be a second round of talks next week that could take place in Pakistan.
And General, I want you to hear how the chairman of the Joint Chiefs described the sea congestion the Navy is working in. Let's listen.
There is a lot out there. It is like driving a sports car through a supermarket parking lot on a payday weekend with thousands of kids in that parking lot as you attempt to maneuver through there to get to that ship that would attempt to run that blockade.
That paints a picture, right? There's also the concern of sea mines in the area. How does the military navigate a situation like this and chase down any ships that violate the blockade? And is it sustainable?
So it's a great question. Thanks for asking. I think the U.S. Navy and U.S. Central Command are well prepared, trained, and equipped to perform this mission with the same professionalism, competence, and precision that they've shown throughout the campaign. It is a very narrow waterway, and I'm confident that they can do the job of turning around ships that may have select ships that may have left Iranian ports or have paid a toll to Iran. I think the blockade will be effective in putting some kind of economic squeeze on the Iranians. The question is, how much can they withstand? And the answer is probably quite a bit. But what the blockade does not do is effectively open the flow of commerce through the strait, and I think address perceived risk concerns by shippers and their insurers.
Jeff, if and when a second round of U.S. talks with Iran are scheduled, the vice president will need at least 17 hours to fly to Islamabad. How close is the administration to firing up his jet?
Well, I wish I could tell you that. They haven't been very explicit about when those are going to happen. The president did hint a couple days ago that it might take place in the next 2 days. Those 2 days are now past, but the press secretary yesterday at the White House briefing suggested that talks to set up these talks are going well. So I think we can expect to see it in the coming days or weeks. It's hard for me to speculate beyond that, other than to say that the broad messaging coming from this White House and this administration is positive about the possibility for talks and the possibility of an end to this war. That's certainly the language that President Trump is favoring, even when you're getting some slightly more negative or threatening language from his Secretary of War.
I mean, even President Trump telling ABC News this week that he didn't think the ceasefire would need to be extended. Richard, do you share that optimism?
Well, the ceasefire will need to be extended. Whether it can be translated into a quote-unquote peace agreement remains to be seen. I think both sides, though, have a real incentive not to return to full hostilities. Iran's economy is in terrible shape. They've got to begin a process of repairing it. For us, we've taken out so many targets, there's very few left. And the last thing we want to see is this war once again spread throughout the region to the energy infrastructure of the other countries. So I think there's a real incentive to keep a ceiling on what's going on. And again, I think there's a deal to be had with the Strait. There's a deal to be had on the nuclear. So for the first time, I can see the pieces of an agreement. I don't think it's cockeyed optimism to think we can get from here to there. But, big but, American leadership, Israeli leadership, Iranian leadership three big uncertain factors there.
And of course, with the Strait being such a key piece of this war at the moment, General, we heard for weeks the administration say the Navy would escort ships through this strait. Why would CENTCOM back off that plan? Is it an issue that they don't simply have the number of ships needed to do it?
Well, it is a very resource-intensive mission, and again, one that they are well prepared, trained, and equipped to do. Perhaps with the arrival of another carrier strike group, that might be a mission that they take on. All of these missions are militarily feasible, but expensive in terms of the number of destroyers that it entails, fighter aircraft, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And so to perform multiple operations like a blockade and escorting is even more expensive. Obviously, the throughput would increase if there were other nations that were participating, but there's no way we have the capacity to escort the same level of shipping traffic that was going through the Gulf before the campaign began.
Richard, a senior Trump administration official told MS Now, quote, negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are not linked to the Israel-Lebanon talks. But Richard, how do you separate the two? If Iran is demanding a ceasefire in Lebanon and the U.S. wants Iran to stop funding proxies like Hezbollah?
We could say they're not linked, but if Iran says they're linked, they're linked. And then the question is whether the president picks up the phone and calls the Israeli prime minister and, as bluntly as he can say, knock it off. That there's no reason right now you have to be in Lebanon. We've got bigger fish to fry dealing with the nuclear issue, getting these straits open, which are central to the world's economy. This president has enormous leverage in Israel, given his popularity and standing there. Bibi Netanyahu cannot afford to say no to this president, given the upcoming Israeli elections. So we are in a position, I believe, to quiet things down there and to focus our diplomatic energies on, again, opening the strait and dealing with the nuclear challenge. That's where we are.
Meantime, Michaela, President Trump says the leaders of Israel and Lebanon would be talking today, but Lebanon says they don't know what he's talking about. Where does this stand?
Yeah, the president says he's trying to get a little bit of breathing room between Israel and Lebanon, but there's been no official confirmation from either side that we could see a conversation between their two leaders. But we did just learn the government of Lebanon is confirming that a phone call took place this morning between President Trump and their president and Lebanon really pressed in that conversation for a ceasefire agreement to happen with Israel because they've seen more than 2,000 people die. They've also seen more than 1 million people displaced. So they are really pressing for negotiations with Iran and the U.S. to also lead to an agreement with Israel and Lebanon for strikes to stop there. And there's been a lot of confusion about this because initially the government of Pakistan said Lebanon would be included, and Iran is very much pressing for that in negotiations with the U.S.
Yeah, and Jeff, it's really interesting that the U.S. is the mediator in these talks between Israel and Lebanon. It is a major test now for the U.S. and Secretary Rubio. How is Rubio trying to build trust between these two countries?
Well, certainly bringing Rubio into the mix, too. I mean, it's been notable that Rubio was not the chief negotiator for the talks with Iran. That was Vice President Vance, and we're expecting or being told that Vice President Vance will lead the next round if it happens. So I think what the secretary is now doing is as just exactly represented in your question, is working to build trust and shore up this part of basically the potential weaknesses or potential threats to a peace deal. And that's been hanging over the peace deal or a potential for a peace deal ever since President Trump announced the ceasefire in the first place.
Even with this ceasefire, there are still signs of escalation. General, if Iran doesn't get what they want, they're threatening to put a chokehold on the Red Sea, so to close off essentially another key shipping area. Does the U.S. have the military assets and the personnel required in that region if this war were to expand?
I think what we have in the region would be very stretched to both man a blockade at the Strait of Hormuz, as well as reopen the Red Sea in the Bab el-Mandeb. I would note, however, when the Houthis close the Bab el-Mandeb, it's not because they have a navy. It's because they are using missiles, drones, and other kinds of things to attack ships. So perhaps more of this could be done from the air, certainly. If the Navy were involved, it would more likely be in an escort role.
Lieutenant General Karen Gibson, Richard Haas, Akayla Gardner, and Jeff Mason, thank you all for starting us off this hour.